Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ennis-Pierce. Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 7th of July 2024. Just got back from a football tournament. British summer, so I was monumentally rained on consistently. Anyway, back in the driving seat here. This is going to contain quite a lot of information. This video, there's an awful lot to go through, so hopefully it won't be too long for you. Right, we're going to start with the Russian losses, Ukrainian general staff figures for them for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,150 personnel lost. That's pretty much where we've seen it, give or take. 2 tanks. That falls into this situation of up and down in terms of tanks recently. Some days they've been high, and then other days down to 0, nothing. 3, 8. It's just all up and down. We've talked about some of the reasons why that might be. Could be logistics for tank deliveries, or it could just be anomalous. It could be that today's a Sunday and the stats are a little bit slow or something like that. Who knows? But it's not usually the case for Saturday stats to go down. So 16 armoured personnel vehicles, 40 artillery systems. Average for armoured personnel vehicles and high for artillery systems, although we have seen it at 66 yesterday. So it was stupendously high yesterday. And now you look at 40 and you think, well, that's a bit low. And of course, it's still an incredibly high number, double the average and some. One anti-aircraft warfare system lost 50 vehicles and fuel tanks and pretty high 16 special equipment losses there. So some fairly difficult losses for the Russians. To lose those kind of figures on a daily basis is obviously going to hurt. Now, we've got 2 days of Andrew Perpetua. He released these stats yesterday and then today's ones this morning. So this is referring to the day before. I didn't get to go through them yesterday, so we'll do this just as quick as I can. So Russia lost 82 pieces of kit, 53 if you ignore the comms equipment. There are 29 pieces of Russian comms equipment. You can ignore those if you want. Only the nerds care. That's I often say I would ignore them because they're not as high value as the other equipment. Although it's interesting to note that they are there in such high quantities, and that could be the Ukrainians really trying to take out comms equipment, or it could just be a big old single video maybe of a montage of lots of this equipment being lost. So not too sure. 16 motorcycles, 3 ATVs, 2 loafs, a Bobek, 8 trucks, earth moving truck filled with engineering equipment. But anyway, remaining 19 were combat assets. So the Russians have lost 19 combat assets, 3 artillery, 12 tanks, 3 IFVs and 1 APC. Ukraine lost 37 stuff, 34 if you ignore the comms equipment, and they lost 13 combat assets. So actually quite closer in terms of the non-surveillance and comms equipment, and that could be a little bit worrying for the Ukrainians there. Okay, let's look at the Ukrainian losses here, and you can see that the ratio of damage to destroyed isn't too bad, to be perfectly fair. Air defense system is an S-300 PS launcher from an Iskander strike that we saw the other day. We're going to talk about possibly another Iskander strike on possibly some more S-300s, but it's all highly controversial, so we'll look at that in a wee while. A couple of boats damaged and destroyed, some artillery, nothing too crazy. It's T-64 tank. A few Bradleys there, 4 Bradleys, well, 3 Bradleys and 1 maybe a Bradley in the damaged IFVs. So they've got 5 IFVs, 4 of which may well be Bradleys. So that is a concern. I say a concern, but then it also shows they're using lots of Bradleys, and hopefully they'll get some more in fairly soon. Quite a few civilian vehicles damaged and destroyed there. We have a few decoys and misses and whatnot. So nothing crazy high value apart from the S-300 launcher, which is very high value. The no radars in along with that, so that's good news there. Now the Russians have a don't know why that odd truck is up there, but command and control vehicle has been destroyed, and that's going to be good for the Ukrainians. That'd be fairly high value with intel and possibly expertise inside. So that's it's good to see that go. This R412A destroyed by an unknown cause is something I talked about yesterday. I think that's comms equipment. Was that up in the Kharkiv area? And then quite a lot of varied comms equipment going down there. As mentioned, 29 pieces of comms equipment. Engineering vehicle, a few bits of artillery, quite a number of tanks, range of tanks there. Nothing that really jumps out of you, no T90s or anything. About half of them, actually, if you take the abandoned, more than half destroyed and abandoned. So that's fairly good news for the Ukrainians there. So a couple of IFVs, not nearly as many as normal, one APC, and this could tell you something. You've got all these motorcycles, a huge number of motorcycles there, a number of golf buggies and four-wheelers, quads, and then a number of trucks. So it could be that the Russians are using different equipment to what you would normally expect, because possibly, as I always say, they could be running out of that kind of equipment. So that was 2 days ago. Then we have this equipment from yesterday. Andrew says that too tired to give you the stats to go through and give the synopses that he does so usefully. But thank you, Andrew, for doing this full stop. So this is last night's equipment yesterday's losses from what he and his team could gather. Not a crazy amount of Ukrainian combat assets lost here. 2, 4, 6, 7. So 7 combat assets there. You got electronic warfare, bit of kit, a nota, which could be they claim it's counter battery radar. I'm not sure what it is, says Andrew, with a Lancet taking that up, so that will hurt a little bit, but nothing too crazy. Another Bradley thrown in there. All those tanks are pretty much unknown. And then a few bits of civilian vehicle and whatnot. So for the Russians, some surveillance and comms equipment again. Fair range of artillery, a few pieces of artillery, 5. Don't often see too much artillery, as mentioned before, on Andrew's list, but quite a lot of the other stuff is destroyed as opposed to damaged. So that's good for the Ukrainians as well. T-80, T-72s and BMPs, BTRs, MTLBs, all the usual suspects there. Trucks, four-wheelers, a number of Desert Cross, so that's 7 Desert Cross 1000-3, the golf buggies, and a quad, and a whole bunch of civilian equipment as well. So just a massive equipment that the Russians have lost that I think does overwhelm the Ukrainian equipment there. So I think 2 fairly good days for the Ukrainians in terms of the Andrew Perpetual loss list, although that S-300 launcher will certainly smart. And then we see a number of different analyses from a number of sources concerning the Russian losses. So the Kyiv Independent reports on the Medusa and Mediat Zona analysis. I think this is BBC Russia as well, possibly. Around 120,000 Russian troops have been killed since the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, according to the report by independent Russian media outlets Medusa and Mediat Zona. We'll just pop into this article and see what they have to say. Now, around 120,000 troops have been killed since the launch of the full-scale invasion, according to the report by those two, together with BBC News Russian. Yeah, so it is. So previously, we've heard that the numbers are sort of 50, what was it, the last one? 57,000. And lots of pro-Russian trolls get on and say, it's not very high. But they've been very careful to say that it doesn't include LPR, doesn't include DPR. It is your benchmark minimum. It's people who have been announced on social media where you get a public announcement of their death and it can be 100% linked to the war. So if there's any doubt that it's anything to do with the war, then they don't include it. And so these are your absolute benchmark minimum. This is definitely your minimum number of people who have died. And I don't know whether they've released a report now that includes these others or whether they are making a calculation above that to say, we think this is where it is. So we'll go and read on. In February, the outlets estimated that 83,000 Russian soldiers had been killed based on the analysis of a restricted but non-classified database of inheritance cases. So this is not what I was talking about just then, which is the social media obituaries and announcements. These are inheritance cases. They then compared trends to those in publicly available mortality data from Russia's State Statistics Service, records from the Russian probate registry, and obituaries. On June the 28th, they provided the names of over 56,000 Russian soldiers that have been killed since 2022. Medusa and Mediazona have since updated its data collection method, as the time and resources required to trawl the data when it becomes available produces a significant lag, sometimes of 6 months. They have now produced a new method to create flash estimates. So it's kind of what I was saying, that they're going on some estimates, but that would be, I wonder whether they look at trend lines and say, right, well, our data comes out 6 months behind where we are now, and so we extrapolate that to now, then actually this is what the losses would be. So previously they were making claims that are actually 6 months out of date by the time they had made those claims. That's how I interpret that. According to our latest calculation, as of the end of June, approximately 120,000 Russian servicemen have died in the war since 2022, but the real number could be as high as 140,000, Medusa wrote. Ukraine's General Staff estimates that Russian military personnel losses surpassed 500,000 on May the 25th, 2024. The overall consensus is that it includes, so the General Staff figures included dead, wounded, missing, and captured. And they came out and admitted that because there was all this argument. I was reporting this, every morning and saying, I think these aren't just dead. Many of you were saying, yeah, they're definitely just dead. It's like, yeah, not sure about that. And then they came out and publicly admitted that it was not just dead, but included wounded, missing, and captured. And so that is, they say overall consensus, but that has been omitted. In February, Zelensky said that 180,000 Russian troops have been killed since the start of the all-out war. The president said that over 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers were killed during the same time. Western officials gave similar estimates about Russian battlefield losses. Leo Doherty, British Minister of State for the Armed Forces, said that in late April, UK estimates from Russian losses were over 450,000, so that would have been wounded and fatalities. And we estimate that approximately 450,000 Russian personnel have been killed or wounded, and tens of thousands have already deserted since the start of the conflict, Doherty said. So that would actually, if that was and deserted, that brings you up to the Ukrainian General Staff figures of 500,000. So pretty interesting that the UK agree with the General Staff. Number of personnel killed serving in Russian private military companies is not clear, he added. So, and that admits that they would be even higher because the PMCs weren't included. US estimate in December the 12th, this is going back half a year plus, put the total of 315,000 on the same day. The Ukrainian figure was 340,000. So it seems that the US, UK, and indeed the French came out as well with figures that were around about the same amount. All the main kind of the big militaries that are supporting Ukraine seem to think that the General Staff figures are fairly accurate. And now we've got this idea that 120 to 140,000 had died, and that might not include DPR and LPR as well, because they're talking about inheritance cases from the Russian database that probably doesn't include the occupied territories, and it also won't include foreign fighters as well. So that there are still a lot of caveats, and it's still a case of saying, well, that's a benchmark minimum. It's likely to be higher, even down 140,000, where they say it's likely to be higher at the 140,000 rate. It's actually likely to be higher than that still, if you include DPR, LPR, and foreign fighters. Right? Okay. So that's pretty good news for the Ukrainians. It means that these are very high losses, and that fits in line with the claims from the General Staff, especially. So 140,000, if you times that by 2, you get 280,000. Then add that on, that's 380, 420. So that's a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's less than a 3-to-1 ratio of wounded to dead gets you the General Staff figure. Wow. And if it's higher than 140,000, then so that's a bad look for the Russians, because actually it looks like many of their wounded must transfer into dead, many more than you would expect normally. So yeah, whichever way you slice and dice those figures, it just doesn't look good for Russia at all. Then we have this claim. So leaked documents suggest more Russians killed in Ukraine than previously thought. Between 462,000 and 728,000 Russian soldiers were killed, injured or captured by mid-June, The Economist reported, citing leaked documents from the US Defense Department. So having just said that, okay, we're looking at 140,000, and if you were to times that by 3 and add that onto the 140,000, then you're over the general staff figures. So these are bad looking figures, but wow, the idea from leaked documents is that they've lost 3 times the amount of dead. So that Mediadzona and Medusa and BBC Russia estimate is actually incredibly cautious if the US estimate is to be believed. So this is reported in The Economist. Tendai usefully summarizes here the numbers documented in the latest article of The Economist reporting on the Russian losses in Ukraine in the last 2 years are staggering. They have exceeded all losses the Soviet Union and Russian Federation experienced from 1945 to 2022 combined. Somewhere between 462 and 728,000 of Russian soldiers have been permanently eliminated, basically confirming the numbers Ukrainian forces have been reporting all along. You can also see from the chart that the numbers of destroyed Russian militants has increased significantly over the past months, especially in connection with the failed Kharkiv incursion, which is what we heard from the what we've heard from all sorts of different sources, but including Zelensky himself, who said that the ratio went from 4-1 to 6-1 after the Kharkiv offensive. It confirms what I was suspecting, says Tendai. For a while, Russia is trying to brute force a decision on the battlefield, respectively. It is trying to project that it is making progress on the ground and lie to the public that Russia is winning the war. Though a few gains have been made on the ground, they have all been tiny. In some cases, such as the Kharkiv incursion, they have been partially reversed. Strategically seen, the Russian offensives have been all but a string of failures. The attrition rate of Russian human material and hardware is not sustainable in the long run. The situation of Russian armour and the reserves have recently been part of the debate. Depending on the analysts, Russian reserves of armour will last between 18 and 36 months. We'll come to this later, but it will end in a foreseeable future. The Ukrainian drone campaign against Russian oil facilities and other high-value targets in Russia might expedite Russia's downfall. It is a thorn in Russia's side, which many still don't take enough notice of. Summarising the paragraphs above, it appears that the Kremlin considers that this year to be a make or break period. The Russian reserves are not enough to sustain a prolonged war beyond the next 2 or 3 years. It is coming to an end, one way or the other. So more than ever, Russian cannon fodder has been thrown into the fire. Putin needs to convince, more specifically bluff, that Russia is winning, now more than ever, but numbers are not lying and Russia is failing by virtually every metric. This is why Russians are investing so much to install their puppets in Western leadership positions and hope that this stops the war for them. The concerted effort by Russia will accelerate in the coming months. If Russians fail in doing so, or their puppets do not turn out being this good, especially after realizing that long-term precautions have been taken to mitigate those risks, it will have a dramatic impact on the Russian war effort. Europe, and especially Germany, are holding the keys for Russia's end. It is up to their determination to steer into the right direction, even without the US. The economic capacities are available even today. And of course, this is the importance of the political situations in each of these countries. So France is worrying. Germany is all right. I sometimes say it's worrying thinking about the rise of the AfD, but in reality, what would happen in a next election would be that the Social Democratic left would, the coalition would fall apart, the Greens and SPD, and it would be likely replaced by a CDU coalition, Christian Democratic Union, so the centre-right, rather than the AfD. Although the AfD are gaining in popularity, it's unlikely that they'll be forming a government anytime soon. And the CDU, a bunch of like Merkel's old party, are dead against Russia, so that would be okay. And then, of course, there's a whole issue with the US and Trump, etc., etc. And so, if the Russians can continue to undermine united thought behind, or this unity behind Ukrainian support, then that's their route to success, I think. But really good news in the UK that it appears that a change of government has not affected, will not affect that. And even though you can look at the rise of the populist right in the UK with Reform becoming the second party in a whole bunch of constituencies, and the Green Party's second in 41 constituencies or something, interestingly. So we've got a fracturing of the political landscape. A lot of people talking about how Labour are on thin ice or whatever, but actually that's the election for the next 4 years. So do you know what? That's what we've got for the next 4 years. And there is, it appears to be great support for Ukraine. So things are looking good, but there are many people saying actually one of the weaknesses of the Biden administration's just lack of being ballsy enough, basically, to support Ukraine. They're just it's so fragile. The path they're trying to weave, and they're dancing to Putin's red line tunes, and that needs to change. But of course, with the election coming up, it could be that makes an I don't know. I think it'd be great if Biden just really takes the bull by the horns and takes that with him into the election and says, well, look, this is what we're doing. We're being really strong, shows us how to be really strong. So I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Like the figures here, either way you look at it, like the most conservative, the most cautious approach to the Russian losses, which would be 120,000, right? That's your benchmark minimum. That's terrible. That fits in line perfectly with the Ukrainian general staff figures, because if you add the wounded and the deserted and the POWs onto that, then you get to 550,000. And if you don't, it means that you've got an incredibly bad ratio of dead to wounded. So either way, it's just a bad look for Russia. So fascinating stuff. And that's why I knew it'd take a bit longer to go through today's video. The Russians lost up to 5,000 soldiers in an attempt to take one Chasiv Yar micro-district, according to the spokesman of the Kortitsia OSU, Nazar Voloshin. The situation in the city is under control of the Ukrainians, and invaders are suffering significant losses, he said. Now, that's the Canal micro-district. So over the course of the attack on Chasiv Yar, 5,000 Russians losing their lives there. Now, whether that's dead and wounded and captured and deserted, don't know. But it just goes to show that the Russian approach to taking any of these places is flattening them. Liberation looks like flattening them and killing your own people to take a bunch of rubble. That's the Russian way of doing war, and it's incredibly painful there. Now, I said yesterday, here we have a Sri Lankan POW, so we must remember that there are other nations involved that need to be added. If you're going to have an accurate sense of the losses, then you need to add all of those foreign soldiers that won't be on the Russian inheritance databases and announced on Russian social media. I don't know how many that would be. No idea whether it's in the thousands, whether it's in the hundreds, whether it's in the tens of thousands. Don't know. Right, let's look at some other strikes. I can't show you any of the videos we're going to look at, but destruction of Russian command post near Hliobke in the or Hliobke in the Kharkiv region. FPV drones destroyed a small ammunition depot and a communication station, which is very important. Ukrainian troops controlled yesterday about half of that place. I think, was that the one that had the dish that was all burnt afterwards? I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah, lots of video footage of things getting blown up coming out. I can't show you this one, but you can see the size of the explosion. This was that's a whole building there. Massive explosion from one FPV hitting it, so goodness knows what was in there. And Tim White says, when one Ukrainian FPV drone causes this, Russia is storing a lot of stuff there, he said. So that's just another massive strike just happening with drones. Drones are causing so much problem. In fact, when we get to distant strikes, it's an attack drone that seems to have hit an ammunition depot in Voronezh that has caused a massive explosion. Right, anyway, yesterday Ukrainian forces targeted and struck two military facilities in the occupied Donetsk region. In Debaltseve, they hit a logistics center where Russian forces stored tank equipment and ammunition. In Novoluhansk, they destroyed the expensive Russian automated jamming station, the R330 Zhitel. Now, the Zhitel is a very expensive piece of kit, and if that appears on Andrew Perpetua's loss list, then we'll be going straight to that and saying, well, that's worth the entirety of the entire, the entirety of the Ukrainian list. If it's a bog standard kind of day, this is, a lot of money's worth of kit. So yeah, bad day for the Russians. Now, Russians have started doing, well, at least according to this source, Elena Halushka, instead of double tapping, triple tapping. So double tapping is where you strike someplace with a missile or with shelling, and then you wait for the emergency service to come, and then you hit them again. Well, now they're talking about triple tapping. As if double tapping wasn't evil enough, the Russian invaders have switched to a triple strike strategy in Nikopol, so that's just north of the Zaporizhia reservoir. They attacked first responders who arrived at the scene to put out the fire that occurred after the Russian shelling, damaging a fire truck. Then they attacked a second time when another fire truck arrived to pick up the firefighters and equipment. Fortunately, first responders managed to find shelter in time. This is horrific. So, tough stuff there for the Ukrainians trying to, just save people's lives there, because that's how the Russians do things. Now, we're going to look at stockpiles of equipment. Jakub Janovsky from Oryx says, I highly recommend reading this whole thread and watching the attached video, Covert Cabal. So Covert Cabal has gone through with HIMARS and done another analysis of tank stockpiles, and they've been IDing and analysing the status of remaining tanks in storage. So HIMARS says, here is how many tanks are left in the Russian storage bases in mid-2024, as usual, done together with Covert Cabal. We made some changes to our methodology. So first of all, here are the numbers by type and base. As you can see, Russia has removed about 2,500 tanks from visible storage. But the removal rate has declined from 115 tanks per month in the first 16 months to roughly 60 tanks per month over the last year. Now, I don't know what that means, but I would guess it would be something like the subsequent tanks they have to take out now will require greater fixing up. So like I often say, you take out the good ones first, so you buff them off, you get to the front line, and then eventually you get down to ones that need fundamentally reassembling, refurbishing, and that will take longer. So you're taking fewer of them out because they take longer to sort out. That I assume would explain that. So we have all these tanks pre-war, 6,236, then mid-2023, 4,383, then mid-2024, 3,657 total tanks there. And that still seems like quite a lot, but it's about just not quite half, just over half of what was there to start with. So we'll have a look at the analysis. So initially, Russia had a lot of reserve tanks in good condition, which were taken out of storage quickly, and the rate was likely even higher than the 115 per month, since they had some tanks stored in garages. They could likely compensate their high initial losses. So that's also worth remembering, is that although you have the 6,236, that probably doesn't include those stored in garages. You could say the same now, but they probably had a lot of fairly decent ones stored in garages, rather than what would be in garages now, or the ones they've taken out of storage. So before you had storage and garage, right? And now you still got storage and garage, but the ones replaced in the garages have gone from perfect to needing a lot of work. Initially, Russia, they could likely compensate their initial high losses. Over the last year, the rate of removal was roughly 60 tanks per month, which is not enough to compensate losses of at least 93 tanks per month, according to War Spotting. The reason for this is probably that the remaining tanks in storage are in increasingly worse condition, as I said earlier. Here are some images from the ground. Many of them are already more than 15 years old, so these tanks will likely look even worse by now. So these images are themselves 15 years old. Look, that one's a 13 or 12-year-old image. That's from 2009, so 15 years old. So these were, and look how rusty, and then look at the barrels there. You're thinking, right, 15 years on top of that, and those are the tanks they're getting out onto the front line now. It's almost impossible to determine if a tank can be brought back or not from satellite images, but there are definitely many tanks among the remaining vehicles which, in my opinion, won't ever run again. On the other hand, some tanks that look like this have been removed. It is possible that these tanks are only suitable for total overhauls. As you can see in this screenshot from a Russian MOD video of Omsk Transmash, the hulls don't have to be in good shape to be refurbished. With enough money, time and spare parts, it's probably possible to refurbish any tank, but the process will become more costly over time. Additionally, Russia has so far focused on setting up refurbishing, upgrading capacity only for some types, the T-80s, T-72B and variants of the T-62s. They haven't removed T-72A Ural tanks in bigger numbers, and if there is a reason for that, apart from the tanks being in bad shape or having a sufficient stockpile of T-72B, then there might be another 1,000 tanks with only limited usability. I don't think there will be any specific point where Russia will run out of tanks, because of course they're always producing them, but their tank fleet will likely be slowly but continuously shrinking over time, which will have an effect on their offensive capabilities. It should also be noted that we have made some changes to the identifications of the tanks at some spots, mainly because of previous errors in new ground footage. The identification of individual tank types is often uncertain, and there might be further changes in the future. The total number is probably quite accurate, although it is possible that they still have some tanks in garages. I don't think this is likely, but so when I said earlier they would have replaced ones stored in garages with other ones, but actually no, the point here is that so the initial numbers, going back to those initial numbers, would have been much higher in the pre-war period because of all the ones stored in garages, because they're the ones that are basically possibly still in active use, but just stored in garages. Then they've taken them out and they're not bringing stuff into garages because they're not really storing. There's no point taking a tank that's rusted out in the fields and then moving it to a garage, just sit in a garage, right? As this is just work, no need to do that work. So these stocks and garages are gone. Those tanks will go to the refurbishing plants. So actually, the figures do look even better for the Ukrainians, arguably. So there's 6,236 pre-war in the fields, unknown amount in garages. Then they took a load from garages and then started taking the ones from the fields, and then we're back down to almost half. But actually, it could well be over half given the garage situation. Anyway, sorry to belabor that point. So the total number is probably quite accurate. Yeah, additionally, there are some more tanks in the 61st, 103rd and 560th BTRZ. I'm also planning to write a thread with predictions for the future of each tank type, which will be likely posted tomorrow. So there's a breakdown of the condition for the tanks as well. So that you have no decent T-55s and then 177 poor, 39 worst, right? And you'd think these worst condition tanks are the ones that probably are beyond economical repair. But anyway, that's what he has to say there. So he then goes on to say, what you should take from this is that Russia still has many tanks remaining in storage, but they are in increasingly worse shape, and that the current removal rate doesn't match the battlefield losses. In other words, it's not looking very good for the Russians. Okay. Going on to this. So this is a paramedic talking. It's a paramedic saying this. Quote, the enemy is insidious. They use everything that can mechanically and chemically affect a person. They use everything that is banned, chemicals, fragments, anything. Ukrainian paramedics talking about the actions of Russian troops in Chaziv Yar. So the idea is that the Russians are breaking rules as well with the way that they are fighting in Chaziv Yar. I don't suppose that comes as a massive surprise. Right, now, well, just a separate group here for a few other claims. So Russians report an attack on a Patriot system. The Ukrainian Air Force says it was a decoy. To back up the words, the Russians released a video taken by reconnaissance drones. Thank you to everyone who, quote, thank you to everyone who helps with high quality models of aircraft and air defense systems. The enemy has fewer Iskanders and more mock-ups will be delivered, said the commander of the Ukrainian Air Force. So there's been a lot of chatter on the socials about whether a Patriot system has been struck, right? To the point where War Vehicle Tracker yesterday says, do not jump to conclusions yet. I can only, for now, partially confirm the Ukrainian loss of 2 M903 tails for the PAC-3 Min-104 Patriot. I strongly advise to read the whole thread. After the impact, a strong white fire can be seen, which is known with missile fires. So initially, War Vehicle Tracker said, yep, I think there have been 2 losses for transporter erector launchers for the Patriot. So this would be bad news for Ukrainians. And then he geolocates it below. It says, try my best to collect more information, and then gives his rationale for what took place. He said, as I forgot to add, the impact is the same as in a video with the labeled S300 from last month. So then started to be some doubts coming in. It's like, oh, actually, this appears to be possibly some recycled footage. We'll have to wait for a geolocation from the Sentinel image. And then John Ridge came along he who helps Touchney on occasion. Says, at a glance, this would be unusual configuration from an M903 launching station. Notice the all-up rounds are loaded 3 abreast with roughly equal spacing. So there you go. M903 can load a PAC-3 MSE 1 pack and 2 pack, but the spacing doesn't seem consistent, although the video quality is poor. So he's basically saying, I don't think that is Patriot. On top of that, the claimed impact is edited from a prior claim strike on a Ukrainian S300P in May. Also, all trailerized Patriot launching stations have a generator at the front. So then War Vehicle Tracker says, I'm pretty confident it is not a Patriot. So he went back on that. So sadly, there is no low-res imagery available, but in the first picture, which is from yesterday, shows the position. The second picture shows the position being built in January. Works started around the 9th of January 2024. It started work. So then they're talking about how, if you're going to build revetments and dig this stuff in, then it's likely it's a real thing than a decoy just being dropped off, and they were building ahead of the game. And then someone saying, are you giving to count every decoy you see? And so he replies, do air defense decoys burn white? And so one of the big arguments is it burned white, etc., etc. Then you have this came out. He brought this out. So thanks to Sentinel low-res imagery that did come out, I'm now able to confirm so then the idea was it wasn't a Patriot, it was an Aspide or Spada, which is using French missiles, but the supposed Aspide Spada site was not hit. The green arrow, which shows the geolocated site for the Aspide or Spada, clearly has no visible impacts or scorch marks. The yellow, showing a decoy S300 PS, only shows the known bush fire. In other words, I think he now admits it was so he's saying, yes, I was heavily arguing that the white smoke was indeed coming from the site, which I was seemingly definitely wrong. Whenever and whatever it was not related. I admit and excuse my mistake. So anyway, this is just trying to give you an understanding of how open source intelligence works, which is somebody makes a claim, but they say at the beginning, take this with a pinch of salt. This is open to change, and then other people help out by saying, well, actually, here's some satellite imagery. I've got expertise on launchers, and this isn't that launcher. So, okay, so it could be this launcher. And says, actually, it looks like these were built in place earlier this year. And then it's like, yeah, but actually that white smoke wasn't from that. It was from this. And actually, there was also a previous video, and people pile in. It's like the scientific method. Eventually, you get to a sense of accuracy, which is, who knows what happened, but it's probably not a Patriot and could well have been a decoy, which is good news for the Ukrainians using decoys. So Air Force Commander Mykola Oleschuk has said that on July the 3rd and 6th, Russians successfully destroyed model aircraft, as in not like a toy airfix model you're going to make at home, but like decoys at Ukrainian airfields. Quote, I'm grateful to everyone who helps with high quality models of airplanes and air defense system. The enemy has fewer Iskanders and the models will be delivered. So this video here actually includes both the airfield strikes and that, I think here we start going to, there's a launcher there. So the supposed Patriot strikes as well. So it's a bit of everything. And this video supposedly includes decoys for both. So some of those, the claims are that some of those airframes that we saw taken out last week with those 3 consecutive days of strikes might well have been, the claims are that they were decoy airplanes, which is good news if it's true, right? But I don't know. So, of course, both we and the enemy have losses of equipment, says the Air Force commander, but neither side is talking about it publicly. It's clear why. As an exception, in order to explain to society that not everything is so clear-cut, I am showing 2 fresh enemy strikes by Iskander-M taken from Russian reconnaissance drones, Dolhintsevo airfield in Kryvyi Rih on the 3rd of July, and Yuzhny district, Odeshchinya, on the 6th of July. Air Force personnel successfully conducted passive defence measures. Thanks to everyone who helps with quality models of aircraft and air defence systems. The enemy aircraft has fewer Iskanders and mock-ups will still be delivered. So that's a full message, you said that. So interesting. A lot of talk to say that it might well be that the Russians have used up a number of Iskanders, haven't struck what they've claimed, have put those videos out there, but they could well have been decoys. Right. On distant strikes, Ukraine has managed to shoot down all 13 Shahed kamikaze drones launched by Russia from the Kursk region. Sorry, just to go back to that though, I suggest you go and check these out in greater depth. Like, I'm really skimming over this because it's going to take a long time today. However, so all 13 Shaheds were shot down, but 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles did get through and were not intercepted. I don't know anything about them at the moment. It may come out. Now the biggest piece of news from Ukrainian strikes on Russia, and this happened during the daylight hours, video of explosions after a drone attack on ammunition depot in Voronezh region in Russia. It should be noted that the Russians have already declared a state of emergency and are evacuating residents from the Podgorensky district. This is a big one, right? You might not get a sense of how big it is from these images, but this is a big one, and I think it's still going on. SSU drones attacked an ammunition warehouse in Voronezh, Army TV sources reported. It is noted that the Russians stored surface-to-surface, surface-to-air missiles, tank shells, artillery, and boxes of ammunition for firearms there. And indeed, Anton Gerashchenko confirms himself. Russian Telegram channels report that the ammunition warehouse in Voronezh region that was attacked by drones last night stored those things. From there, they were supplied to the Russian military on the front lines. So this might well have a knock-on effect to the front lines, where you could see a shell or ammunition shortage for a period of time at some points in the front, depending on where this ammunition is supposed to go to. This could be really significant. A powerful explosion and fire broke out between the villages of Mali Mayak and Vinohradny in the Alushta district in temporarily occupied Crimea. So this was a gas pipeline that exploded last night. Now, according to local social media, the explosion is likely to have been caused by a gas pipeline. Do I have any others on that? No. So this is still being talked about. Quite a lot of discussion on this pipeline, because I think it's caused lots of people not to have gas in Crimea. And the Russians are saying it was not struck. It was a technical fault, so on and so forth. Now, whether that's true, who knows? I don't know whether it's a strike or a technical fault. But gas pipeline going up in Crimea is going to hurt the Russians, no matter what caused it. Then an electrical substation caught fire in Russian Khazavyurt in Dagestan. As a result, more than 70,000 Russians were left without electricity. I don't know what caused that, whether that's a strike or some kind of random explosion to a substation. Seem to be happening quite frequently at the moment. And then we have, so this is satellite imagery coming out from the Krasnodar region, oil depot that was struck, and that there was some serious damage done to the oil storage tanks there. A number of those being taken out, and I saw imagery of that like from the ground right next to it, and they were not in a good way. So really successful strike in Krasnodar there for their oil capacity. Moscow is to use barrage balloons to repel Ukrainian drone attacks. In a Russian aerospace firm, First Airship has developed a balloon prototype and has started testing it, according to the Daily Telegraph. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. So if you can't afford to get S-300s, then surround your oil refineries out in the middle of nowhere with big balloons. Surely it's easier to create them than it is to create an S-300 air defense system with all the microelectronics that you would need to do that. Kiev has restored 2/3 of its generating capacities after Russian missile attacks, official says. The Russian strikes damaged more than half of the city's generating capacity, deputy head of the Kiev city-state administration said. So this is only in Kiev. It's not like Kiev representing the whole of Ukraine. 2/3 of Ukrainian Kievan generating capacity has been restored, so that's good news for the capital there. But there is a real sense of foreboding for Ukraine with regard to the energy infrastructure and winter. There are some people claiming there are going to be huge numbers of Ukrainian refugees leaving Ukraine in the winter because of the vulnerability, the weakness of the energy infrastructure. Now, changing subject here onto other bits and pieces. Ukrainian Navy Commander Oleksiy Nezhpapa reveals the absence of Russian warships in northwestern Black Sea. So if you're talking about going towards Odessa and up to, I guess, the Bug River and Dnieper River estuary and around Snake Island, nothing. The Russians haven't dared to go near there since 2023. He outlines Ukraine's naval objectives, including targeting Russian vessels and preventing missile strikes. So yeah, there has been a success for the Ukrainians that hasn't been, I think, celebrated enough in mainstream media. So the Ukrainians have done an incredible job effectively winning in the Black Sea. The Russian fleet doesn't fire cruise missiles, and they are essentially hemmed in at Novorossiysk, and even there they are getting some undue attention, or some very due attention, from the Ukrainian drones, the maritime drones there. So incredible success for the Ukrainians in that respect. A Moscow charitable foundation donated 20 bulletproof vests with wooden plates to Russian military personnel. So this is, I mean, that's great, wonderful charity, guys, but I don't think that's going to do quite as much as maybe Kevlar might do. So yeah, some bulletproof vests with wood in them for the Russians there. An official warning has been given to Ukraine to stock up on non-perishable food. So this goes back to the weakness of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure over winter. They're preparing for the worst in case power cuts stop fridges working for a long time. On the list are tinned food, dried meats, freeze-dried goods, instant soups, noodles, nuts, and dried fruits. So things are looking quite hairy for the Ukrainians over the winter. Atesh, the partisan group in Crimea, well, primarily in Crimea, notes the increase in defensive positions along the Crimean coast. In Yevpatoria and Yalta, civilian contractors are building defensive structures. Among Russian military personnel, rumours are spreading about a possible autumn breakthrough by the Ukrainian armed forces. This has been discussed a lot. I've talked about this with regard to the Russian air defences being absolutely obliterated around Crimea, to the point where you're thinking, is this ahead of some kind of landing from maybe both airborne and Marines on Crimea? And of course, the Russians, you might as well be safe rather than sorry. So building these kind of fortifications are sensible, eminently sensible, but it might also reflect this fear that the Ukrainians genuinely are going to attack Crimea. A new episode in the saga. So yesterday I reported that Romanov, the mill blogger who was very close to an exploding oil refinery or depot yesterday, did a whole big report, and I read you the synopsis, and part of that was that the Akhmat, the Chechen special forces groupings, were sitting behind the frontline forces in Kharkiv and basically sitting there twiddling their thumbs or being barrier troops, but basically not getting involved. In fact, there are claims that they refused to get involved at one point when they became frontline troops. Now, he's come out to apologise. Interesting. So he's got a rap on the knuckles here. And I don't think what he says is at all true, but he's had to say this. So I apologise to you and the Akhmat units. Russian military correspondent Romanov promptly apologised to Alaudanov. So Apti Alaudanov is the Chechen guy in charge of the Akhmat. He said he had a conversation with Apti Alaudanov, the commander of the Akhmat unit, from which it became clear to him that he was wrong. Quote, "It became clear to me that Akhmat units are standing together with conscripts on the front line." That's nice. "That is, directly on the line of contact. The words I said in the video that Akhmat units are behind the conscripts are wrong because I trusted information from other sources. I apologise to you and the Akhmat unit for this. I will check the information more carefully from now on, Romanov said. Of course, that's complete bollocks. And he's sitting next to what I presume is look, he says, I've also heard exceptionally positive and good things about Apti Alaudanov, having had a long and informative conversation with him, blah, blah, blah. So, he's really sucking up to Alaudanov, probably sitting next to an Akhmat guy there, I don't know. But saying that, no, they're on the front line, then they're not sitting behind conventional forces. From which I would conclude that almost certainly Akhmat are sitting behind the conventional forces and are being barrier troops and are not getting involved. That is perfectly clear to me from that scare quotes admission. Right, recent Russian polls indicate a growing support for peace negotiations with Ukraine. While Kremlin propaganda shapes domestic war support, non-opponents criticise war conduct but remain patriotic, ISW reports. This is the idea that, we need to go for peace, but it's not that we don't support the war. Yeah, it's good that we kill all these Ukrainians because Ukraine Nazis, etc., etc. But we should be thinking about peace. However, on the other hand, 1 in 3 Russians believe a nuclear strike against Ukraine would be justified, according to research from the Levada Center, a Russian independent polling organization. Wow, who knows whether that's true then? I don't know that we can trust Levada right now in the middle of the war, but it wouldn't surprise me that many Russians would think going nuclear is a justifiable option. We want peace or nuclear holocaust. Take your pick, one or the other. I mean, should we have peace or nuclear? Peace or nuclear? Cake or death? Cake or death? Cake, please. Anyway, here we have Kamil Giliev saying, great thread here. Soviets used to keep absolutely massive forces on the border with China. Starting from 2022, Russia's been moving everything west, stripping the Far East naked, so the Russian-Chinese border is getting effectively demilitarized for the first time in over 50 years. This is super important. So just to give you the context, Russia have traditionally been not very friendly with China. Yeah, BRICS, this relationship without limits, right, that they're supposed to have. But actually, Russia have been military wargaming Chinese invasions for a very long time, and they have been putting loads of their troops along that Chinese border in the event of an eventual Chinese move on Manchuria, on areas of the east, right? But since this war has started, they've needed those troops and that equipment. So they have been quietly removing it from the Chinese border now that and becoming a vassal state of China. And there must be some in the Kremlin worrying somewhat about how easy it would be for China to take advantage of that. So this thread said, I use Google Earth and Google Planet satellite imagery to count the number of S-400 and S-300 TELs, transporter electric launchers, at anti-aircraft missile bases of Novosibirsk. Since the invasion of Ukraine, it has been determined that approximately 105 TELs deployed at 11 of the 17 bases have been moved. The base location is from Archer 83 Abel's KML, so that's a mapping file. So this person then goes on to say, all 7 TELs were removed from the 1724th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment base at Sakhalin Island. And then, going through more and more of these, you can go and check this out if you really want to. 8 of the 17 TELs were transferred from another base, also on Sakhalin Island, and then so on and so forth. You get all of these launchers being taken away from where they normally would be along the Chinese border. All 8 TELs, this is the last one here, I've skipped a load. All 8 TELs were also transferred from 590th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment based in Novosibirsk. So there might well be a whole bunch of S-300s and 400s still being drafted into places like Crimea. So just like with the tanks, Ukraine will have to go through this period of attriting, and eventually there'll be none left in the tank. Russia are just committing military harakiri at the moment. It's incredible. This war. So some people who think that cynically that the US is slow rolling and drip feeding support for Ukraine in terms of equipment, because this kind of long-term attritional warfare is more beneficial for, say, NATO and the US in terms of utterly degrading Russia's war capability. And you could argue that. I don't think that's happening. I think that's morally problematic in one sense, although you can make a moral case for it in the long term being the right thing to do, but you're sacrificing Ukrainian lives in order to do that. So we won't get into that. But either way, this is happening, right? Of course, not all these tails were moved to the occupied territories, including Crimea, or to the border with Ukraine. However, but they backfill. So you take them from Moscow and then backfill them from the Chinese border. However, given the base to which all the tails were moved, it's highly likely that nearly 60 units were sent to Ukraine or the border areas. So there you go. Another example of an interesting trend, and that relationship between China and Russia is one to look at very closely going forward. Arta Ray, who's a YouTuber, says, one more miserable failure. The window of opportunity for Russia to achieve anything on the front in 2024 is steadily narrowing. Russia has its prime opportunity in a long time from October 2023 to autumn 2024 to make gains on the front, as Ukraine faced shortages in manpower, shells and fortifications. Despite its best efforts, Russia failed miserably to achieve anything significant while Ukraine was at its weakest. Its only accomplishment was the capture of Avdiivka at the expense of tens of thousands of casualties. Russia's diversionary offensive north of Kharkiv did not achieve its objectives, but it compelled Ukraine's allies to permit Ukraine to launch strikes into Russian territory. As Russia squandered its opportunity, Ukraine has been mobilizing, fortifying, boosting production, targeting Russian energy infrastructure, and ultimately receiving shells and equipment from allies. Russia has yet to capture the small but important town of Chasiv Yar, and its time for launching a decisive offensive is running out. By the year's end, Ukraine will have become too formidable for Russia to achieve significant successes on the front. For Ukraine to maintain its advantage in this war, the best approach is to refrain from large-scale offensives, I agree, and concentrate primarily on defense, I agree. Ukraine's success will not come from reclaiming territory, but from conveying to the Russians that this war is unwinnable. It may take years for the average Russian to recognize in their imperialistic, revanchist, and materialistic mindset that this war is unwinnable and futile, but that realization will eventually occur. For that day to arrive sooner, Ukraine needs to defend itself. I agree there broadly. Although this is a very positive outlook for Ukraine, and Ukraine is very fragile in a number of areas, and they are still struggling with mobilization. They need far more people, and this will affect their economy and so on and so forth. There are issues for Ukraine, and they are being attrited at really difficult levels, but it seems that Russia is taking that idea and run with it. Okay, that's enough from me. That's a really long one today. I might not do very much else for the rest of the day, but hopefully that was useful for you. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pits.